Hello friends, today in this module we are going to talk about the very important standard. It is ISO 15138. This is a standard which is widely and commonly used in oil and gas marine HVAC industry, in specific to the offshore platforms. And when we talk about this ISO 15138, it focuses on the design objectives and the design functionalities of HVAC in oil and gas offshore platforms. Well, when you compare it to the building industry, you will find there's a humongous difference between this standard and ordinary building standards. The reason is obvious because this standard deals with the safety. As I already explained before, oil and gas offshore platforms are located in the middle of the sea. Hence, the occupants or habitants on these platforms who are taking care of the platform, involved in day-to-day operations of rigging, and they have to stay in their accommodation, they all have to be safe first. So safety first, safety is very important. So whenever you are designing a HVAC system for any reason, you have to keep in mind the safety over here. So we are going to discuss here, it's a lengthy module, very lengthy module. It is a very theoretical module, but unless you practice this module, unless you learn the nitty-gritties of this module, you cannot crack any interview, you cannot design any HVAC system properly for oil and gas platforms. Because designing is not all about the design values. Designing is not only about the heat load calculation. Designing is not only about the airflow calculation. Designing for oil and gas platforms much go beyond to that level. So safety is the first thing you need to design in the mind when you design the HVAC, and this is what is properly covered in detail uh, in this particular module. Please remember, if you do not know about this module, you have no chance to enter into the oil and gas sector. So your all focus should be whatever I'm telling. Be very careful. As the name of this standard ISO 15138 suggests, this is a standard for petroleum and natural gas industries, offshore production installations, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So when we talk about this, there are 4 points which we need to take care in mind, which we are going to cover it. Point number one, this particular standard specifies design requirements, provide guidance to design, testing, installation, and commissioning of HVAC system for new as well as existing offshore installations of either fixed or floating in nature. The offshore platforms and their types are already covered in previous module. Those who have not visited, they can go to the previous module and check the types of platforms. They will understand what I am talking about, the fixed as well as the floating platforms. So this particular standard covers the fixed as well as floating platforms, and it gives the specific guidelines for designing, installation, testing, commissioning of HVAC system for the oil and gas platforms. So this is point number one. Let's go to the point number two. For installations that can be subject to the class or IMO oblique module codes and resolutions, the user is referred to the HVAC requirement under these rules and resolutions. As I've already explained in my previous modules that if any oil and gas onshore or offshore structure is there, especially offshore structure or a marine structure is there, it has to follow a certain class. It could be either IMO module or any other class, but there are several classes which that particular offshore platform or marine has to follow. So if it has to follow, then this particular thing is also applicable. This particular standard is also applicable to that particular requirement. Point number three, when these requirements are less stringent than those being considered for fixed installation, then it is necessary that this document as requirement of fixed installation be utilized. It is very clear that if the requirement of these are very stringent, are less stringent, then the requirement of a fixed installation should be utilized. Point number 4, statutory and local requirements always prevail. This means that this particular standard, suppose you are executing project in Brazil, and Brazil laws or Brazil government has already have a particular standard that is called as statutory and local requirement. So that takes a privilege over this particular standard. So whenever you start any project, first you need to understand, is there any local standard available or not? For example, suppose we execute a project for Saudi Aramco. It's a big company. It's the world's biggest oil and gas company. It is Saudi Aramco. So that particular company has their own standard. So that takes a privilege over this ISO 1513. But suppose there is no standard available, then this is the one which should take the privilege over the other standards. ISO 15138, when the standard is written or when the standard is prescribed, there are certain normative references also have been made. If you see over here, ISO 7235, ISO 8861, ISO 12241, ISO 12499, there are several standards which are listed over here. You can take a note of it. R has to be used for the reference because there are several reference, because in all this ISO 15138 it is difficult to write everything or duplication will happen. So to avoid the duplication, certain references are being made in the standard, and these are the names of the standard, and this is what each standard signifies. If you look at the general design requirement section 5, it covers that when you design any HVAC system for offshore oil and gas platform, there are some 8 points which we need to keep in mind while designing. First, sufficient ventilation, heating and cooling capacity in all adverse weather conditions we need to consider in mind. Second is acceptable air quality in all adverse weather conditions. Third is reliable performance through the concept selection. Fourth is inherent robustness by providing design margin for the system and equipment. Fifth is simplicity with preference for the passive system. Sixth is fault oblique status indication and self-diagnostics. Seventh is pairing of a system and equipment. Eighth is maintenance to the inspectability and ease of operation. So these are the 8 very important aspects we need to consider. First means when we are starting designing of any system, we need to read first all these 8 requirements. Then we need to visualize that which system fits the best to serve this requirement. There are certain additional design requirements which are stated in the standard. Let's see what are those requirements. First is maintain survivability in the TR by preventing ingress of potentially flammable gas mixtures through appropriate isolation, pressurization, and provision of multiple air intake location and enough air changes, gas detection, and emergency power supply. Well, what does it mean? Okay, it looks, or when we read it, very heavy, but in reality,